"Help me, brother," I cried, stumbling into this home on a freezing winter night. My clothes were in tatters, barely offering any warmth. Clutching a baby tightly in my arms, I stumbled through the door, my voice breaking with desperation. My brother, taken aback by the sight of me so changed and frail, quickly took in the scene. I was clad in nothing but a torn shirt and barefoot. His eyes widened in shock as he rushed to my side, helping me inside and quickly starting to warm up the room. "What on earth happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern as he wrapped the baby, who was sound asleep in my jacket, in a warm blanket. I could barely stop shivering. "Who did this to my precious little sister?" he muttered through clenched teeth. "Sarah, it's going to be okay now." At the sound of his soothing voice, a wave of relief washed over me, and I felt as if all my strength had drained away. "My name is Sarah. I'm a 27-year-old homemaker with a young son. I used to be a nurse until Jack, the son of the hospital director, proposed to me. Jack was kind and efficient, traits that initially drew me to him. I have a brother who is 5 years older than me. After our parents died tragically in a car accident when I was 4 and he was in 3rd grade, he became my protector. Our parents were killed when their car was struck head-on by a truck driven by someone who had fallen asleep at the wheel. My mother, a nurse like me, was working late that night. My father had gone to pick her up, and just before he left, he had told my brother John, "I'm counting on you to take care of Sarah." Those words became unforgettable for John, who took them to heart and has protected me ever since. We never fought. He has always been like a superhero to me. After the accident, it seemed John and I would be separated and placed in different foster homes. However, our paternal grandparents, whom we hadn't interacted much with before, took us in. When I first met our grandfather, with his white hair and bushy beard, he looked like a storybook Santa Claus. "Seeing John," he murmured, "you're the spitting image of your father," and I thought I saw tears in his eyes. Our grandmother, a kind woman, hugged me tightly and sobbed, "Poor child." Later, I learned that our father had a falling out with our grandfather, leading to his departure from home. Our grandfather wanted him to continue the family business, but our father saw his freedom, resulting in a bitter parting. John and I moved to our grandparents' house in the rural mountains. Our grandfather, a renowned potter, created works so famous that a single teacup could fetch thousands of dollars. Thanks to his success, John and I grew up without financial difficulties. Our grandfather was stubborn and detested dishonesty, dedicating himself entirely to his craft. Despite the absence of our parents, our grandmother's incredible kindness ensured that we grew up happily under their watchful eyes. John attended a prestigious university in the city, and I pursued nursing school. We both had the opportunity to follow our dreams. However, when our grandmother's health began to decline, John returned home from the city. I wanted to return home too, but as I was still a student, John advised against it. He had always been fascinated by our grandfather's pottery, but their insistence on following his own path had led him to university instead. Our grandfather, regretting the pressure he had put on our late father to continue the family business, was determined not to impose the same on his grandchildren. Nevertheless, John was resolute in learning pottery from him. With his natural skill and love for the craft, pottery seemed like a perfect fit for him. John excelled in everything he pursued: academics, sports, and his social life. He was truly a superhero, taking care of our ailing grandmother while mastering the art of pottery. Meanwhile, I graduated from nursing school and started working as a nurse. It was during this time that Jack proposed to me. Our wedding was grand, and what I remember most are the joyous smiles of John and our grandfather. John even brought pictures of our parents to the ceremony, saying through tears, "We all just want you to be happy, Sarah," including Mom and Dad. Our grandmother, too ill to attend, wept tears of joy when she watched the video of the wedding. Feeling truly blessed with such a wonderful family, I left my nursing job, moved into Jack's family home, and began supporting him as a full-time homemaker. We soon had a child, and life with Jack was smooth and fulfilling. Little did I know that challenges lay ahead. Not long after my grandmother passed away, Jack stood by me, attending the funeral and offering comfort. Our grandfather was deeply disappointed, and I struggled to find words to console him. John, while supporting our grandfather, became increasingly absorbed in his pottery. 6 months passed, and life continued to unfold. I stumbled into my brother's house in the dead of a freezing winter night, my clothes ragged and barely adequate against the cold, clutching a baby in my arms. John was speechless when he saw me, so changed and frail. I was emaciated and weak, dressed in nothing but a thin, tattered shirt and barefoot. "What on earth happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern as he quickly ushered me inside and started warming up the room. The baby, wrapped in my coat, was peacefully asleep, but I couldn't stop shivering. "Who did this to my dear sister?" John muttered through clenched teeth. A wave of relief washed over me at the sound of his voice, as if all my strength had drained away. I didn't want to burden John or our grandfather with my troubles, but I had no choice but to explain. I began to recount the events at my in-laws' house. Jack and I had moved in with them because they insisted I rest during and after my pregnancy. My in-laws, who had both remarried, seemed like a genuinely close-knit family. Jack was the stepson of my mother-in-law, and I was initially happy that my child and I could become part of this family. My father-in-law was kind and told me to make myself at home. His kindness was especially precious to me since I had no father. However, my mother-in-law didn't seem to share the same warmth. "You're flirting with my husband, aren't you? You disgusting woman," she would say, starting to harass me whenever my father-in-law wasn't around. Her taunts were cruel. "You're an uneducated child with no parents." Her abuse went beyond words. She inflicted physical harm as well. She'd spill boiling water in my direction, plant pins in my meals, and even try to push me down the stairs. It felt life-threatening. Her family had a long-standing reputation in the retail business, managing a major department store chain run by her brother. "Your background is miles apart from mine," she would sneer. "You can't possibly fit in with someone who grew up in poverty." To make matters worse, due to a shortage of staff at the hospital, a former nurse was frequently called in to help, working alongside my husband Jack. This only added to my mounting troubles. I began to notice something unsettling about Jack. Being the son of the hospital director, he often berated the nurses unreasonably. "Move quicker, you're a nurse getting paid, aren't you? Don't slack off just because my father is lenient. When I take over this hospital, I won't be so forgiving. How many times do I have to tell you to order the supplies in advance? They're not cheap, you know. Don't take running a hospital lightly." His scoldings were harsh and directed at nurses who were already working tirelessly for the patients. "Jack, don't you think that's too harsh? Everyone here is trying their best," I interjected one day. He didn't take kindly to my intervention and flew into a rage in front of the other nurses. Since that incident, Jack grew distant from me. This change in his demeanor was likely influenced by my mother-in-law, who had been telling him from the start, "You're too soft on your wife. She's taking you for granted." While my father-in-law was still well, Jack couldn't be openly hostile or abusive in his presence. However, when my father-in-law fell seriously ill and became bedridden, the situation worsened. My mother-in-law seized the opportunity to make me handle all the household chores, treating me like a servant. I was overwhelmed, juggling my son on my back while cooking, doing laundry, and cleaning. Even with my father-in-law bedridden, my mother-in-law's mistreatment continued. Though he tried to intervene, his weakened condition made him unable to stop her. "Please don't speak to Sarah that way," he would say weakly. "Oh, here you go again defending that woman," my mother-in-law would retort venomously. "And you can't even do anything with your frail body. I wish you were gone," she spat, her anger palpable even towards my sick father-in-law. I endured the harsh treatment for the sake of my son and father-in-law. The harassment only grew worse. My mother-in-law would scold me, saying, "Housekeepers don't eat with the family. Eat the leftovers later." Her words cut deep, and I was so upset that I lost my appetite. When I looked in the mirror, I was shocked by my gaunt and ragged reflection. Jack told me, "I only married you because you were somewhat attractive, but I never thought you'd end up looking so shabby. I'm too embarrassed to be seen with you." He even ordered me to move from our bedroom to the storeroom. How cruel could people be? Jack and my mother-in-law didn't stop there. They began to verbally abuse even my son. "Of course he's not smart. Just look at his mother," my mother-in-law would sneer. "His constant crying is annoying. Make him stop right now," Jack would demand. It felt like something inside me had snapped. I resolved to run away, but my only concern was my father-in-law. If I left, who would take care of him? He could be in serious trouble. Sensing my distress, my father-in-law said, "Don't worry about me, Sarah. You should escape to your brother's place." He pulled out several $100 bills from under his pillow and pressed them into my hand. With no time to spare, I decided to flee immediately. I wrapped my son in my coat to keep him warm and rushed outside. Using the money my father-in-law had given me, I hailed a taxi and headed to my grandfather's house. There, I poured out the whole story to my grandfather and brother John. John, his face flushed with a fury I had never seen before, shook his clenched fist. "You've had it tough, haven't you? It's okay now. Relax," he reassured me. Overwhelmed, I burst into tears. My grandfather, equally enraged, muttered, "I can't forgive this." A few days later, I left my son in my grandfather's care and, accompanied by John, returned to my in-laws' house to collect my belongings. I had left in such a hurry without a word that I was concerned about any trouble arising when we returned to my in-laws' house. As we arrived, my husband greeted us with a cold, disdainful look. "So, you finally decided to come back?" he muttered. John, remaining calm, responded, "My sister is very distressed, so we'll be taking care of her for a while. We're here today to collect some of her personal belongings." My husband shot back, "I married her, so if she doesn't come back, there will be no one to handle the chores. That's a big problem for me." My mother-in-law, looking down on John, remarked, "I heard you do pottery. It must be a difficult life. Even if you take care of my daughter-in-law, it's going to be tough for you. Please send her back, it's a problem for us too." John clenched his fists tightly, visibly struggling to contain his anger. When we were shown to a storage room in the corner of the hallway, my makeshift room, John's expression was one of shock. The cramped space held cardboard boxes and old appliances in disarray. There were a few changes of clothes for me and my son, but no heating appliances, just a thin blanket and a flimsy mattress. John's eyes burned with anger as he confronted my mother-in-law. "Is this where you've relegated my sister and her child?" he demanded. She retorted coldly, "She should be grateful to have a room. She's just a housekeeper." I wanted to leave that house immediately, but my concern for my father-in-law lingered. When I saw him, he quietly handed me something and apologized to John for not being able to protect me. In the days that followed, John, my grandfather, and I made preparations. Determined to fight for my son, I headed back to my in-laws' house, resolute in our resolve. I knew I couldn't keep running away forever. When we arrived at my in-laws' house, I handed my husband the divorce papers. He looked taken aback for a moment, but then declared he wouldn't be paying alimony or child support since I was choosing to leave. To support my case, I played a recording of his mother belittling me and of him shouting at me. "This is evidence of the abuse I have suffered," I said firmly. My husband and mother-in-law were visibly shocked and asked, "When did you even record this?" It turned out my father-in-law had secretly recorded everything to support me. He had discreetly handed over the recordings when I went to collect my belongings a few days before. John, who had graduated from law school and passed the bar exam while helping our grandfather with his pottery, had advised me that I could get a divorce since my husband was clearly at fault. John had been actively practicing law to assist those in need within our community, and he promised to fight for me with everything he had. My wheelchair-bound father-in-law arrived and handed the divorce papers to my mother-in-law. He had also recorded all the verbal abuse he had endured and was ready to divorce as well. He preferred living in a care facility over staying with my mother-in-law. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law burst into laughter. "All right, go ahead and divorce me. I'll return to my brother's house and go back to my luxurious life," she said dismissively. At that moment, my grandfather made a call. "I'll terminate any contracts with a family like this," he declared. It turned out that the major department store run by my mother-in-law's brother was on the brink of bankruptcy. He had been eager to secure a deal to exhibit and sell my grandfather's renowned pottery and was close to finalizing it immediately. A call came from my mother-in-law's brother, the department store owner, severing their ties. My mother-in-law's face turned pale, and she sank to her knees. The gravity of her situation finally hit her, and she began to beg. "Please forgive me. I was out of line. I have nowhere else to go. Please let me stay here. Sarah, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." There was no way we could forgive her now. We all looked on coldly as she wept. However, one person still seemed to be in denial about the reality of the situation. My husband. He said to me, "I'm set to inherit this hospital. If you want a divorce, I'll pay alimony and child support. I'll marry someone younger and prettier than you." At that moment, my father-in-law interjected with a single sentence. "The hospital has been sold." My husband's eyes widened in shock. It turned out that my father-in-law had been orchestrating the entire situation. "Get out of here right now," he screamed at his stepson. My husband's face turned ashen. Since he wasn't legally adopted by my father-in-law, he had no claim to the stepfather's assets. On the other hand, I was legally adopted by my father-in-law, who had always treated me well. Realizing the gravity of his mistake, my husband quickly tried to plead for a fresh start, but I coldly dismissed him. Afterward, my son and I settled into a comfortable life at my grandparents' house. He cried less often and spent his days exploring nature, finding flowers and insects. My in-laws' divorce, along with the damning audio evidence, played a crucial role in establishing my mother-in-law's fault. According to mutual acquaintances, my mother-in-law and husband now live in a small rented apartment. Their attempts to find new jobs have faltered, and they are struggling with part-time work, spending their days in endless quarrels, blaming each other for their plight. Meanwhile, my grandfather enjoys a comfortable life in a high-end senior home. My son and I visit him frequently. John, as always, continues to work with pottery under my grandfather's guidance. My mother-in-law's brother, who wasn't at fault, successfully hosted the pottery exhibition at his department store. At the exhibition, John met a lovely woman who is a fan of pottery, and they started dating. I'm hopeful we'll hear good news from him soon. I work as a nurse at a hospital near my grandfather's home. It was my dream to follow in my mother's footsteps, and I find great fulfillment in caring for my patients.